Yeah, sure. My name is Carl Finamore, and I'm retired now. I was president of Air Transport Employees Local 1781, which was the largest machinist union local in the IAM for a period of time. It's not now, it's about 7th or 8th. It organizes airline workers at all the Bay Area airports in Oakland, and San Francisco, and even Reno, Sacramento. Since retirement, I've been writing a little, and the thing that captured my imagination was Egypt. Because as I'll describe, so many things are happening there that really portend classic revolutionary situations where you have clearly defined people, middle classes, upper classes, military, Muslim Brotherhood, working class, youth, women. They're clearly defined, and I will do that for you. I will define them, I will explain them. When you walk out of this room, you'll be able to analyze events in Egypt more clearly for yourselves than most people, I assure you. So that's what I've been doing, that's who I am. I write a little, I'm an activist. I went to Cairo in Egypt with letters from my union and from the San Francisco Labor Council, which I am currently now a delegate. Now that's about me. Howard Zinn, it's an honor really to be, that's something named for Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn, it was the second book I ever read when I started getting involved as a young kid. He wrote Logic of Withdrawal. That was about getting out of Vietnam and why you should just not get out of Vietnam but withdraw. Recognize self-determination, the principle. The United States has nothing to negotiate. Get out. It's a principle. He really was fantastic. And I'm honored to be here. And for Doug, who did this, hundreds of thousands of activists wear this in Egypt. This is a list, partial list of the hundreds of martyrs, which they take very seriously. The hundreds, now thousands of young people who have been killed. I'll describe. And on the back it says, Freedom, January 25th, which is when the revolution started in 2011. And it was the scene of my first visit. So Doug, here you go, my man. Wear this. I know you will.
Oh, thank you so
with
much.
honor, and you'll be able to tell a story about the Egyptian struggle as you proceed with your own activities here for the Occupy movement in Boston.
Thank you. I'm very humbled by this.
My pleasure. Now, remember, the events we're going to be talking about in Cairo, and I'll show you slides after I talk, that are street scenes, vivid street scenes of the big battles and the big crowds. And by the time I show you that, you'll know the forces involved. When Tunisia happened, just a year ago, a little over a year ago, the United States was surprised at what happened. Ben Ali, in a matter of weeks, was thrown out of power. He left for France with $5 billion in his pocket, which was more than the national debt of that country. But when Egypt followed closely after, because that unemployed vendor in Tunisia, young man, self-immolated himself, it caught fire everywhere. The first place was Egypt. Now, that shocked the United States. They were surprised by Tunisia, but weeks later, totally shocked and caught off guard when Egypt happened. Because something happened in Egypt that didn't happen in any of the other countries that have subsequently been lit on fire. First of all, Egypt is the largest country in the Arab world, 80 million plus. It has the largest army in the Arab world. State secret, but the CIA reports publicly just shy of 500,000 active soldiers with another 500,000 on reserve. It has always been a cultural center of the Arab world. It has the premier Arab cinema is located. It has the world's second oldest university, after I guess the University of Paris in 800, the University of Anwar. It has the largest textile mill in Africa, which is a very important center of struggle and the center of the formation of independent unions, which we will talk about. It's Mahala Textile outside of Cairo, 20,000 workers. If you read about Egypt, you'll know the term, Mahala. So it has the Arab world's first metro system, like in Boston here. It cost about 2 cents. Those workers in the Ramsey station just went on strike 3 days ago. It stopped the whole system. So Egypt was a huge factor. But that's not the only reason it was different from everywhere else that subsequently has had rebellion. In Egypt, the whole Mubarak regime collapsed, and it was discovered there was nothing on the bottom. Every institution failed. When the army took over from Mubarak, they had to dissolve the parliament, they had to suspend the constitution, they had to dissolve all the local committees throughout the country. They had to just outlaw Mubarak's party, the National Democratic Party, the only existing party in the Constitution. It was outlawed. You'll see on the sketches, its headquarters, right off Tahrir Square, still remains scorched. I have only a few pictures. I took dozens of pictures. I was just fascinated by that. To see, and by the way, it's right next to, as you'll see, the great Museum of Antiquity in Egypt. What a contrast. The National Democratic Party scorched and just plundered by irate citizens who did the same thing during the 2011 18-day rebellion to police stations. You have the National Democratic Party building, you've got the Museum of Antiquity of the greatest thousands of years old human treasures that exist in the world today, and then you've got 300 yards away, Tahrir Square. You've got 200 yards away, the Ministry of Interior, the hated and despised Ministry of Interior, where the police attacks and murders that I'll describe and you'll see scenes of bloodied youth and women protesters in November and December, called the Mahmoud Street Massacres, the popular term. So when Egypt fell, it exposed the Mubarak regime as just a thin coterie, nothing underneath it. It was him and his family who plundered, reported to be $70 billion. And I had a Moroccan cab driver in Boston. I was asking questions. He says, that's just the tip of the bucket. Are you kidding me? What they found with Ben Ali in Tunisia, he said, that's the tip of the bucket, $5 billion. He said, no, Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates are probably shooting themselves when they see how much money these guys have, by comparison. You know, the national debt of Egypt is only $30 billion, and he has an estimated $70 billion, but he had nothing underneath him. So everything fell, the courts, the parliament, the constitution, their party, and their major trade union. The Egyptian Trade Union Federation of 5 million, which is in the Constitution, as the only trade union, national trade union allowed, it supported Mubarak. It led the camel march. Do you remember the camel assault during the 18 days of marching? That was led by their trade union hacks and bureaucrats, which are on their way back now, as you'll find. And do you know who came and fought back during that day of the camel attacks, by the way? It was the Cairo fans of their city soccer team, called the Ultras. I don't know what it is with soccer fans, but anyway, these guys, and they just kicked butt and turned towards the revolution during the middle of the 18 days, when it was just the revolution and the youth who had been massacred but stood their ground, attracted a lot of people, including the Ultras. And they defeated those camel attacks. And you know, 1 year later, to the day of that attack, is when the massacre of the soccer fans occurred in Port Said, that you've probably read about. You know who those 74 who were killed? They were members of the Ultras. While the police stood by, an orchestrated attack occurred And that's why all of Egypt understood what it was. It was retribution by the army and the police against participants, organized participants, the ultras in this case, who fought 1 year to the day. That's why so many protests erupted in that country, because they knew what it represented. So when Egypt fell, when Mubarak fell rather, the army was the only institution remaining, and it shocked the United States. It shocked them. Surprised by Tunisia, caught completely off guard and surprised by Egypt, and they did something. They unleashed Saudi Arabian army of terrorists. When they want to waterboard someone, they send them to Saudi Arabia. Or they used to send them to Egypt under Mubarak with the hated secret police. They unleashed them against the small country of Bahrain. 1.2 million people, half of them are immigrant workers. And in the last week, New York Times said half the population was demonstrating again. The fire hasn't been put out. But the revolutionary upsurge after Egypt was suppressed bloodily by the Saudi Arabian army. In Yemen, they gave the green light to Ali Salah's army to attack the Yemenis people just a week ago. Salah escaped with how much money? We don't know. He finally gave up and went to the United States, where he now is. King Hussein in Jordan attacked his own people. And we know what the United States and NATO did in Libya, and we know what they're thinking about doing in Syria. They did this. They ruled by their military, they ruled by their religion, and they rule with terror. That's what the United States did, particularly after Egypt. But all of those factors are in play in Egypt as well. Except, as I described, nothing happened in any of those countries that I've described like happened in Egypt, where it all fell. It exposed the Mubarak regime as a thin social layer that even had turned on its own class allies and took property from its own class and gave it to the sons, Gamal, primarily, who are now on trial, the two sons and Mubarak, under pressure. Now, ruling alone, the military, and the reason they had the prestige to rule alone, and they were the only existing institution to remain, is because they never attacked the people directly in their history. They used the 1 million member state police, the building of which you'll see right off to here, which is a subject of many brutal attacks in the last year. They stayed out of domestic fights. They had prestige. But that credibility has gone in the last year, dramatically because of the attacks. They've imprisoned 12,000 people. That's more, and subjected them to impromptu military courts. That's more than during the 29-year rule of Mubarak. They have killed more young people in the last year, both the army and the secret police, which is regrouping under a different name, than during the 18-day struggle. More have died in the last year, and you'll see people who I interviewed last year who had 2 eyes. I interview them this year, they have 1 eye. They're targeted. The main layer of young people on the front lines of the demonstration, and the women, have been targeted, and there's consequences today. So the military was alone, ruling, had credibility at first, but they knew they could not rule alone. They knew they needed other social forces. Otherwise, they'd have to resort to repression. They'd rather resort to confusion. What did they do? They couldn't go back to the trade union, the bureaucratic trade union that had been just in shambles. And I interviewed one of their top leaders last February when I was there. I arrived the day Mubarak resigned. I interviewed him, and 2 hours later, I wish I was there, his office was ransacked by workers who wanted their dues back because there's compulsory dues in the Constitution. This 5 million member outfit, bureaucratic instrument, the Mubarak, is still collecting dues amidst the formation that I hope you've heard of the independent unions that are developing and challenging this. They're not in the Constitution. They're not recognized by the Constitution. It's their sheer power at the point of production that is earning them concessions and giving them some legality administratively, but not constitutionally. They're not protected. So another administrator could say, you're not legal anymore. It's just that they can't do that now. All the old institutions of Mubarak are making a comeback under the collaboration of the partners of the military. Who did they reach out to? What social force can help them reestablish power without naked military rule, crushing the people constantly? It was the Muslim Brotherhood, which has won with its Salafist Orthodox wing, who read the Quran just in their own way, literally, much like the Saudi Arabia Wahhabi sect does. Very extreme. Women played no role. When the Salafists won 20% of parliament recently, the law at the time, which has subsequently been changed, is that you had to have 25% women on your election list. They put the 25%, the Salafists, of women on the bottom of their lists of hundreds, and they refused to put their photographs, which they did for everyone else. They believe women should have absolutely no role. The Salafists are distinguished by the beards they wear. You'll see them performing a role I'll describe in the slides. Now, they reached out to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Salafists are driven ideologically. They're not subject to mass pressure. They won 20% of the lower and higher house of the parliament. Muslim Brotherhood is different. Muslim Brotherhood is 84 years old. It's been outlawed much of the time, and they really have genuine mass support. Salafists have support too, but it's on a little different grounds. It's ideological, religious grounds, their interpretation and insistence on the literal reading and examination of the Quran. Muslim Brotherhood is different. They provide a social role, much like Hamas in Lebanon. They provide charity. They provide religious instruction. And this movement of theirs has been under attack periodically by people in power, repressed them. Their older leadership has been imprisoned and exiled. So they get a lot of sympathy for that. So they still have that sympathy. They still have that support, mass support. They won a little shy of 50% of the upper parliament and lower parliament, about the same. So higher and lower parliament has about 70% Islamic majority. That is not credible. You can't run a society like that. Even Muslims there's a great number of Muslims who want a civil society. As one woman told me, we fought to have a civil society. Now we have the military in power and we have the Islamic majority in parliament. Neither of them are civil. Military is smart enough to know that, but there are not that many other social organizations that survived Mubarak's rule. They weren't allowed to exist under Mubarak's dictator. And the institutions he manufactured were totally discredited by their 29 years of collaboration with this dictatorship, which is why they just fell and were of no value. They have to be reconstructed. So the military is very intelligently and craftily much more sophisticated than the imperial detached Mubarak. They're trying to develop a parliament. They're bringing back the Egyptian Trade Union Federation, this bureaucratic machine. And they're doing it through the Muslim Brotherhood, which has another wing to it other than the social wing, the biggest wing, the mass-based wing that I described, which is older leadership, more conservative leadership that has a lot of credit because they've been jailed. Its younger, more youthful, more educated, more middle class wing is a political wing, which there's conflict between the social wing and political wing over whether you should even have a political wing. But now it's a settled question. The military needs the political wing. And that political wing and that social wing are now joined together in collaboration with the political wing taking the position late to even join the Tahrir events of 2011. They joined in the middle, late, but they came. It was decisive. Now, they support the military. Right after Mubarak fell, go to work. I was at the rallies, mass rallies after Mubarak. Go to work. Let's return stability. And that appealed to people. That appealed to a section. One of the revolutionaries is a term many people, young people in Egypt use. It's a generic term that we don't want to just stop with Mubarak. We got to go on. We got to have democracy really translate into tangible social and economic gains for the people. That's a revolutionary. And one of the revolutionaries, as you'll see, Malik, Mustafa, is blind now in one eye. He says, I still am going to continue. Fight people with power, fight people with guns, fight people with religion. And he said, it is good. He surprised me in the interview that I wrote about. It's good the Muslim Brotherhood is in power. It's good because now the sympathy they gain for their work and for being repressed, now they'll be exposed for their opposition to continuing the revolution. They opposed, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood in parliament, the minimum wage being increased. Minimum wage was just increased a couple of months ago. It was doubled from 35 Egyptian pounds to 115, about $35 a month plus bonus. It comes to about $53. Now it's 115 for 29 years under Mubarak. That's what it was. You got 35 bucks a month if you were a state worker. That was the minimum wage. But you got $53 really. It's a bonus. Bonus is an interesting thing in all the underdeveloped world. It's a form of corruption. For instance, I interviewed an academic I befriended. He's a leftist from England who now teaches at the American British School in Cairo. He told me, yeah, well, I have a guy, an acquaintance. He's a police captain, and he gets 3,500 pounds, 600 bucks a month. That's a lot of money. But his colonel gets 350,000 pounds a month. 350, that's 60 grand a month. But that colonel is expected to distribute bonuses to everybody. You see, it's a form of corruption to get those bonuses. Do you know now the army pays bonuses to everybody in the 500,000 army the day there are protests? Everybody gets a bonus throughout the whole country who's in the army. Separate them. Because if you'd see my slides from last year, which are in that little, you see that stick, but they're not, I won't show them. There was complete fraternization. That's why the army did not carry out what Robert Fisk from The Guardian reported. Mubarak wanted a Tiananmen Square massacre. And they said, no, we can't do it. We don't think we'll carry the army. The army is draftees. Everybody goes into the army. Everyone has family in the streets. Everyone on the streets has family in the army. Everyone on the streets has been in the army. You can't, it's questionable. That army is questionable about how far it can do. The army is continually testing how far they can do. They tested it when they allowed the massacre of the ultras that I described. They tested it in November in front of the Ministry of Interior, where they blinded 35 young people, 7 in both eyes, including a national hero who's a doctor, who lost one eye in Tahrir in 2011, lost another eye in front of the police ministry in November. 7 lost both eyes. You see, when you walk the streets of Cairo, the first day, this time I was back in January for 10 days each time, and I just started seeing people with patches. Now, I don't know, maybe I see one every 6 months when you walk. I mean, But there, I saw about 2, 3, 4. Now, this was in the downtown area. This was a couple of miles from Tahrir. It was a little concentrated area, probably. But I was just saying, what the heck is that about? And then I found out. In November, they were targeting, like one AP photographer who I befriended said, from Britain, he said it was like bloody Beirut in front of the Ministry of Interior in November. They were targeting the young people. They would shoot the rubber bullets with ball bearings inside the rubber coating at the pavement. They would shoot up or they would directly shoot. To dissuade. They knew they had to target the youth. And then when the women came in December in front of the Ministry of Interior, you know the virginity tests. You've heard of that, which the courts, not the parliament, the courts have outlawed. The courts gave doubled the minimum wage to 115, which for the first time covers all workers, not the parliament. Matter of fact, the Muslim Brotherhood had a counter demonstration against a couple of hundred women on the steps of the parliament on March 8th, International Women's Day. They had a counter demonstration. Now, they're not as extreme as the Salafists, but they are against reforms. They're openly collaborating with the U.S. and with the military and with the old trade union regime to try to revive the structures of the state. And that's what Malik, who was blinded in one eye, meant when he said they'll be exposed. As they assume power and they have to make decisions, they'll be exposed and lose sympathy. And that has happened already. You'll see the pictures of hundreds of thousands on the anniversary of the start of the 18 days, January 25th, 2011. You'll see that. 2 days later, I don't have photos of it, 2 days later, when I was in Tahrir Square, it's a Friday, it's a national day, it's a holiday. Friday's their day off of the 6-day week. Another hundreds of thousands are in the street, only this time they challenged the Muslim Brotherhood, who were, of course, surrounded by tens of thousands of their own supporters. They had a banner, as you'll see. They had it 2 days before of the anniversary. They had a banner celebrating the revolution. This is a time to celebrate. And the protesters said, no, we're not here to celebrate. You're in parliament, we're in jail. You're taking votes, and we're getting shot. You know, down with the military, and we want reforms. Tax, which you'll be familiar with. Tax corporations more. Tax the foreign corporations more. End state subsidies to the corporations. And double the increase in the minimum wage. And protect the rights of women and so forth. They're advancing concrete demands. And the Muslim Brotherhood turns a deaf ear to it all. Now, why is that? Well, the military in Egypt, like China, by the way, is different. The military, in this country, the military are just pawns. They're just of the 1%. You know, they give them jobs afterwards as analysts and security advisors. They become millionaires. But in Egypt, much like Caesar, you know, here, take this land in Gaul to his generals. In Egypt, they give you property to manage and to own. It's estimated, and again, this is a state secret, and it's been recently, very recently, Global Post is a very reputable news agency. They had their executive editor and 6 of his reporters do a study of this, and they just were confounded. They analyzed, they talked to diplomats, they talked to people from the Carnegie Institute who've done studies on how much the military owns. They've come up with, of the $180 billion annual GNP in Egypt, 180 billion, the military owns anywhere from 15 billion to what the Carnegie Institute and an Egyptian professor believes 60 billion a year is their take. 15 to 60. That's a lot of money. They are the 1%. They are part of the 1%. They just don't serve the 1%. So they're not getting off the stage. They want to be backstage publicly. But there's no way the military can allow themselves to be removed. That isn't going to happen. And if it does happen, and when it happens, you'll know that's a revolution. That's a change in property relations. That's a change where some of the profits begins to go to the people. And that's why the military is also exercising a bit of independence from the United States. You know, they get $1.3 billion. That's peanuts compared to $15 billion or $60 billion, depending on the estimate you agree. That's peanuts. That's why they can thumb their nose at the United States a little bit. You know, the United States military advisors never go into the barracks, never have access to lower ranking officers at all. They give them the money, they have no budget review, and they deal with the generals only. They keep the U.S. out of their business because they play a strategic role, the Egyptian military. And by thumbing their nose at the United States, they get a little nationalist prestige. So I said that the United States rules by the military, showing it rules and military and terror, and they rule through religion. This isn't the first time the military acolytes of the U.S. used religion, used the Muslim Brotherhood as an ally. The last time it was done, it changed Egypt qualitatively and dramatically. In the early 70s, Sadat, Gamal Nasser died, 1970. When Nasser was in power, he led a coup, military coup against King Farouk, the British colonial puppet King Farouk, 1952. A couple of years later, Nasser emerged as the leader and began nationalizing. You remember? Not remember. I remember. You remember. You don't remember. 1956, the Suez Canal was taken over by Nasser. He nationalized it. Remember that? Well, that was in the... And then Israel, British and French, attempted an invasion. But Eisenhower said, no, this is in the middle of the civil rights movement, just starting. This is in the middle of Nigeria, Nkrumah, African nationalism coming. We can't have this. We got to go with it. You see, there's a saying that I think is very profound. It comes out of a book on Garibaldi Unified Italy. There was a novel about it my parents had me read. And there was one phrase by a prince who joined Garibaldi, and the fictional prince is asked the question, why have you abandoned your class and joined Garibaldi? And he said, if I want everything to stay the same, everything must change. Just think about that, you know. United States is willing to, and the military in Egypt is ready to change everything. Change the, let everything fall, get rid of Mubarak, so that everything could stay the same. Fundamentally. If I want everything to stay the same, I have to change everything. So that's what happened with Nasser. He nationalized not only Suez Canal, he nationalized about 51% of the economy by 1970 when he died. He led efforts of Arab nationalism that ignited calls for unity of the Arab world that had, was remarkable. But when Anwar Sadat came in and wanted to make peace with Israel, and forget about the Palestinian broader concerns and just talk about the land that Egypt lost and to get that back, and even just as bad, related, he wanted to adopt the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, neoliberal economic policies like Friedman imposed in Chile and a lot of other parts of the world. He wanted to denationalize things. And how did he do that? He enlisted the aid of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists. He gave a very notorious, infamous speech, Sadat. He said in the early 70s, I am a Muslim president in a Muslim world. And overnight, he changed the identity of the Egyptian people from an Arab identity to a Muslim identity. And he did that to unleash the Muslim fanatics on the leftists, the secularists, the academics, and those who supported the nationalization. First in the universities, then in the trade unions, and he uprooted them everywhere. It was a murderous, bloody period. It changed the complexion of the whole country from an identity of the people. And that's how you have to understand the misuse of religion in Ireland, Pakistan, Hindu, Pakistan, Muslim, India. All the wreckers of humanity, the colonialists, work this way because it dissolves, takes off center stage, class issues, and it puts forward very confusing religious issues. That's how you explain the attacks, because they just didn't stop at the leftists. The United States supporting the person they just killed in Afghanistan. What's his name? Pardon me? The Muslim, Al-Qaeda leader. Bin Laden. Yeah.
Pakistan, right? Killed him in Pakistan.
Oh, killed him in Pakistan. Yeah. Well, Bin Laden, when they paid him, go attack the Russians, he didn't stop there. He attacked women, he attacked educated people throughout Afghanistan, right? Al-Qaeda and the Taliban just wiped out every secular vestige. That's what happened in Egypt. That's how you can explain when they unleashed the extreme Islamists after this identity change of the country from the top political leaders announcing and promoting it. They went after the Christian Coptics. First time ever. First time ever. The origins of Arab nationalists is actually Lebanese Christians in the 19th century. But they attacked, and the reaction, since the 70s, they've been attacked. First time in their history. As a matter of fact, now the Christian Coptics, the Pope just died. You know that? Their Pope in Egypt. And he was one who found biblical justification for a practice that grew up in the 70s of devout, young Coptics who all had tattoos of crosses. Right here, most of them. Some here. So that when they would go to an Arab store and pay, they would be pronouncing their religion. As one woman on the screen, you'll see, a young woman, she says, my parents never had to do this. But I was fanatical. What they were fanatical about is, you're attacking my religion. Not even that they were religious necessarily, but they were being attacked. It was like their identity being attacked. So now, if you're a young person, you're a Coptic, this Pope who just died found biblical justification a few years ago that you had to get that tattoo. So everyone who's a Christian Coptic, and you're young, you will mostly see that tattoo somewhere discreetly on your body. A lot of times right there. And this is a way for the Coptic Church to keep them not only living in the ghettos that they do in Cairo, and most of the murders and victimizations occur in the rural areas where there's not a lot of the 10 or 15 million Coptics. But this is how the Pope and the religion keep them together. But the young people are trying to become political. There was a massacre last year in Maspero of Coptics, and there's a new party, political party, called Maspero. You'll read about it. That is Coptics, in honor of them. They've adopted a liberal, progressive bent. So the alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, not only, there's a history to it. And this change of identity is something that isn't talked about, but it's absolutely critical to understanding what's going on in Egypt. Who divided this country along religious lines? And of course, it's the military. Now, have I gone over 30 minutes?
You're almost at 40.
I'm almost at 40. Well, I'm going to rush through about 50 years of now. But I am going to talk about the other side. But first, I'm going to leave you with something that is a political evaluation I deeply believe. The best organized forces in Egypt today, when you read about it, is the military and the Islamists, for reasons I explained. Under the dictatorship, other social forces didn't have a chance to develop. If you become political, you were killed or imprisoned. Right? Independent trade unions didn't have a chance to learn how to be stewards. Women's groups, independent, couldn't demonstrate. So the socially progressive organizations weren't allowed to develop organizationally. It's all new for them. They're at an embryonic stage right now. They're courageous, they're valiant, they're coming out by hundreds of thousands, but they have no organization to speak of behind them. I'll explain. And I've explained why the military was the only institution on the other side, the power side, the status quo side. But that the Muslim Brotherhood does have a mass base, and they've been brought into the fold. So I consider the situation in Egypt to be a stalemate favoring the military. They're the best organized along with the Muslim Brotherhood. But that the progressive forces have not been defeated. They do not have the level of organization, by far, that the status quo and repressive side does. But they have the right program, and that the institutions that have so far been thrown up, like Parliament, 70% Islamist, that will not have credibility. The old trade union that's coming back does not have credibility. The old state secret police, which is leading attacks and just has been renamed and has come back to its headquarters that you'll see on the slide, has no credibility. And the army has lost unbelievable amount of credibility. What they have is organization. What the other side has is credibility, with this exception. This is very important. Those of you who have been in strikes or know of them, after a couple of weeks, we begin to worry. Workers are getting tired. The mass of people can't just struggle intermittently, constantly. You know, they have real needs. They have to feed people. They want peace. They want tranquility. They want stability. That's what the Muslim Brotherhood is beating. That's what all the media press talks about. That's what the military constantly say. The mullahs, that's what they at the mass rallies I've attended, they're, very brave mullahs in exile by Mubarak come back, and the first thing they say to hundreds of thousands is, we have to go back to work. We have to have stability. Women, support your men, and, don't ask for much until, we'll get the money back from Mubarak by, court process. And This Muslim Brotherhood and alliance with the military is, has the credibility of the Muslim Brotherhood. They still have credibility. But the other side, without the organization, has to, in my opinion, stop waging confrontations with the military, asking for political demands, like down with the military. Down with the military. That's where these bloody street battles led to them being killed and massacred. They're extremely courageous, but the mass movement has to be rebuilt along lines of defending and promoting the standard of living, economic demands, immediate demands for justice, for women's rights, and you build a mass movement around these kind of social demands that affect millions of people desperately trying to earn a living. Because that middle layer of 40% that you'll see on the slides who make $2 a day in Egypt, they're vendors. A lot of them are vendors. They don't create anything, they just exchange things on the street. It explains why the young children who, 40% illiteracy of these young kids, because they're working as vendors to feed their family. They want peace and stability. They're hurt by the 30% reduction in tourism. As the revolutionaries talk to me, they're tired of Tahrir. They're tired of the attacks with the police. They're tired of hearing about the demonstrations. That's a reality that all working people, whether you're on strike or whether you're in a situation where you get killed sometimes when you go to a demonstration, it's that middle layer that has to be won. Otherwise, the vanguard layer is they're going to continue to get killed and murdered through courageous actions that raise demands that are beyond the immediate consciousness of the people. It's not down with Kerensky until you have had first bread and land and freedom. which is the demand of the movement. Now, and this is recognized by the people I interview. Yes, it's a longer struggle now. We're not just fighting Mubarak, we're fighting the whole system. And there has to be built a mass movement. But I will tell you, and we'll go to the slides, I'm going to tell you, I saved the most important thing for last, because I forgot. And that is the role of the working class. See, I told you the youth and the workers have not been defeated. The youth, because 60% of that nation are under 30. They all look like you. 30%. And you know, 90% of the unemployed are these same youth. They have nothing to lose. They're the most courageous. You'd be in your element, the Occupy people here. And by the way, they love the Occupy movement here. They very humbly say, well, you know, we're the inspiration. When they tell us that, we're very proud. We're very humble. Corporations run everything. They say people have nothing. It's all over the globe. We were amazed when we saw it happen in Zuccotti Park and other places. And besides, we can trade information on how to fight tear gas. The one woman here said. So, I want to talk about the working class. Don't forget to have me talk about the women's movement. There's no history to the traditional women's movement of controlling your own body. But women are active. They're raising democratic demands for equality, equal pay, equal work, equal participation in the revolution in parliament and everywhere. And that's a good start in that Islamic society. It's a good start. But the working class has not been defeated either, because they're very strong at the point of production, where the relationship between the military and the repressive forces, it's to the advantage of the workers. At Mahala, 20,000 textile workers have won incredible victories. You just had the subway workers, I said, at one station, dozens of workers at the Ramsey Central Station shut down the whole thing. Airport workers, which I was, shut down. You had 250,000 on strike in September alone. Teachers, social workers, transport workers. The AFLCIO, you cannot understand the revolution without understanding this, is what Khaled Ali told me. He's running for president. He's the most prominent trade union attorney for civil rights and trade union rights in Egypt, Khaled Ali. He said, you can't, he speaks Egyptian, it was translated. He said, you can't understand Egypt without understanding this. The AFL-CIO records between 2004 and 2008, there were 1,900 illegal strikes in Egypt under Mubarak. Most of them were successful. He had to give him concessions, keep the thing going. What's he going to do, staff it with his military? He couldn't. So the workers found that, hey, we have some power at the point of production. When Tahir came, it was the youth and the middle classes. And they used Facebook, and you can call them spontaneous, but really it's not so much ideologically driven. In that repressive regime, Facebook was important for anonymity, to spread the word of where things were, and plus they would change it up with Twitter and other things. They would change it up at the last minute. So the cops would go here, and then they'd announce 6 hours later, no, it's really going to be here. And all the kids knew this. So when they first called on January 25th, 2011 for a protest, remember that was called National Police Day by Mubarak. It's now called Freedom Day. The military had to do that. Before the demonstrations, I'll show you, on the 1-year anniversary, the military released 2,000 of their 12,000 prisoners. They lifted the emergency decree since Mubarak, 29 years. They do these. Remember I told you they were more sophisticated than Mubarak? On the eve of every major protest, they either arrest some corporate or Mubarak-type criminal, or they take some political initiative combined with repression. But what the working class, what the youth did on Police Day, they put out this Facebook, and you know, it's reported 90,000 came out throughout Egypt, not just to here. On that day, it shocked everybody. Most of all the young people. But the police were prepared for their typical demonstration of hundreds, but they attacked nonetheless. It was a brutal attack that first day, second day, and as they stood their ground, working people, working class youth of the 60% of that population began attending, supporting these middle class kids who were not leaving. They were not leaving, and their demands changed from just demands for ending police brutality, which is rampant. Rampant. Everyone has an identity card, tells your education, tells whether you're a Christian or Muslim, and C, M, J, Jewish. But Jewish, there's literally only a couple hundred people. It shows your level of education, which is a form of, oh, you're working class. So we'll take if you're rich, educated, college, it's a bribe. If you're not, we can be, uneducated, you're only a high school graduate or less, we can beat you up or do whatever we want. There's this corruption. That was the first thing. End police brutality on National Police Day. But those demands changed in 3 or 4 days to get rid of Mubarak, a political demand. And it started attracting people. Working class youth started going to it because they tell me, the working class youth, many I interviewed, told me, look, we didn't join at first. Working class people have more to lose. We can't lose a job. That's important to us. We can't go into exile. We can't afford to stay in jail. But it was when we saw those middle class youth stay in the streets and fight and resist, and their demands changed and they stood up, they were being murdered, we joined. But they joined as individuals. What happened February 6th was the working class started to join not as individuals but as a class. And the greatest strike wave in Egyptian history happened on February 6th, 7th, and 8th. And Mubarak was gone February 11th. That's when the military said, that's it. Not only have you taken some of our property and given it to your sons, but you're threatening the whole thing. If everything wants to stay, if we want everything to stay the same, we have to change everything. You're gone. Then, before one of these big demonstrations, a couple months later, they arrested him and they arrested his son. After Tahir, the working class is the best, most cohesive force with the youth and the women to pursue the revolution, continue it. The drumbeat was, stop, go back to work, you'll bring the economy down. And the workers' leaders I interviewed from the independent union said, the economy's always been down for us. We're not going to stop until democracy is translated into meaningful, tangible, democratic and economic and social justices. Isn't that fantastic? So you can't understand why the revolution was successful in bringing Mubarak down in 18 days, and you cannot understand why the events continue with all the repression unless you understand not only the courageousness of the youth, 60% of the population, but the determination and strength of the working class at the point of production. These strikes continue to this day. There were 250 in the last year according to the official data. These are all illegal. They're not sanctioned, but most of them are victorious. There are 2 independent unions. But what they suffer from, I told you, the socially progressive side, what they suffer from is the lack of organization because they never had the possibility to learn. So once you get past their factory, their government house, their transport workers' source of work, the hospitals, there's a healthcare independent union, the national coordination is weak. They suffer. This is the dilemma. Can they catch up their level of organization under a regime of repression where they're not even in the Constitution? They're not recognized. New Constitution is being written after the presidential election. Muslim Brotherhood reportedly is working with the military to come up with because they try to maintain their image of being secular, the Muslim Brotherhood, unlike the Salafists. They're going to come up with a presidential candidate, but the Constitution defining what powers that person has is written afterwards. And it's written with the parliamentary Islamist majority appointing people, and who's in charge of it? That commission, the military. And what does the military say, by the way? You will not, no parliament will decide our budget. You will not know our budget. You will not have control of it. And you won't know, in their own terms, that a little more sophisticated than I'm saying it now, you're not going to know or touch our property. That's separate. The military just gave $1 billion to to Egypt military. What military do you know that has $1 billion to just give? That didn't earn applause, that earned scorn and just proved the point that I was making here. So to end, it's a stalemate favoring the military. They have the organization, the Muslim Brotherhood has the credibility, still. On the other side, you have courage, you have unmet demands, and you have a working class that at their work sites still has power that they're ready to exercise. And so it's a very fluid, very dynamic, very classical revolutionary situation in that place. Much different than anywhere else in the Middle East. I think there's more clarity because I hope I've given you and provided you information on the social and political forces that exist. And it's absent the confusion and the tribalism of the other areas in the Middle East that have been divided so terribly through their history. Thank you. Let's go to the slides, as the person said.